3:42 p.m. local time. Southern Caribbean Sea. From a distance, it looked like an ordinary transit. The water was unusually calm, almost mirror smooth, stretching all the way to the horizon without interruption. The sky was clear, visibility nearly perfect. It was the kind of weather every sailor quietly appreciates, because calm seas often promise a calm day. Moving through the center of that quiet scene was the unmistakable silhouette of the USS George Washington, carving a steady path through international waters. Nearly 100,000 tons of steel, aircraft, fuel, and personnel moved with the controlled confidence of a vessel built to operate anywhere in the world. On the flight deck, everything appeared normal. Aircraft were secured. Maintenance teams moved with practiced precision, without urgency. Below deck, the ship followed its usual rhythm: watch rotations, system checks, routine reports. Nothing on the surface suggested this afternoon would be any different from the many that had come before it. But deep inside the carrier, in a dimly lit space with no windows and screens that never go dark, the picture was already beginning to change. Inside the Combat Information Center, radar operators watched the familiar sweep of the spy radar draw clean arcs of data across the sea. Merchant traffic appeared exactly where it should have been. Distant contacts moved along known shipping lanes. Everything looked normal, predictable, and easy to explain. Until it didn't. A new surface contact appeared, then another, then several more. The operator leaned slightly closer to the display. His expression did not show panic, only focus. "New surface contacts," he said in a steady voice. On the large tactical screen, 8 returns became clear almost at the same time. They were not scattered. They were not drifting aimlessly. They were grouped together, moving on parallel headings, closing from several different bearings. What drew attention was not only how many there were, it was what they were not showing. No AIS signals, no commercial identification, no answer to standard maritime calls. These were not fishing boats, they were not merchant vessels, and they were not moving like a routine patrol. The contacts were still far enough away that there was no immediate reason to react. But at sea, distance is only part of the story. Geometry matters. And the geometry was starting to look intentional. The officer of the watch studied the plot in silence. Distances were called out, bearings were updated, speeds were logged. Each contact kept a steady pace, neither accelerating nor slowing, as if following a plan already set in motion. 8 Venezuelan naval vessels. The carrier strike group was not caught off guard by their presence. Encounters like this had become more common in recent years, but this formation was different. Instead of trailing from a safe distance or shadowing from a single direction, the ships were spreading outward, slowly forming a broad arc ahead of the carrier's projected route. Not a direct move. Positioning. The carrier did not alter course. No alarms sounded. No dramatic commands were given. On the bridge, the captain stood quietly, listening as each update came in. The rules were clear. The ship was operating legally in international waters. There was no reason to raise the situation further. Still, everything was recorded. Every course adjustment, every change in speed, every bearing shift, every minute of silence from the approaching vessels. Inside the Combat Information Center, one analyst spoke quietly, almost as if thinking aloud. They're not just passing through. Then another update arrived. The spacing between the Venezuelan vessels was tightening. 2 contacts adjusted speed to match the others. The arc ahead of the carrier was becoming cleaner, more balanced, more deliberate. That was the moment the picture became impossible to ignore. This was not coincidence. This was not a show for cameras. It was a coordinated maneuver. The carrier strike group kept its posture calm, professional, and controlled. Sensors continued collecting data. Cameras tracked hull numbers and deck activity. Nothing was rushed because rushing is how mistakes happen. Outside, the sea remained perfectly calm. Sunlight reflected from the water and from the steel hulls moving across it, giving no sign of the pressure building beneath the surface. 8 naval vessels ahead, 1 aircraft carrier holding its course. And somewhere in the quiet space between them, the line between routine presence and calculated pressure was beginning to fade. By 3:56 p.m., the pattern was no longer open to interpretation. Inside the Combat Information Center, the tactical display now told a clear story. The 8 Venezuelan naval vessels were no longer moving on simple parallel tracks. 2 shifted course to the north, 3 eased south. The remaining ships held the center, maintaining speed while the others repositioned around them. What appeared on the screen was no longer a line. It was an arc. Distances were announced in a steady rhythm. Bearings were refreshed every few seconds. The nearest contacts were still miles away, but at sea, closeness is not measured by distance alone. It is also measured by intent. The ships were not rushing forward. They were not pulling back. They were shaping the space ahead. A maneuver like that does not happen by chance. It takes coordination, planning, and a shared purpose. Each Venezuelan vessel adjusted speed by tiny margins, holding its position relative to the others while gradually tightening the pattern ahead of the carrier's projected route. From the bridge, the captain listened without interrupting. No change of course was ordered. No increase in speed followed. The carrier kept its heading, moving forward with the same steady wake it had carried since morning. That choice mattered. Changing course would have suggested that the pressure had been recognized and answered. Holding course sent a different message entirely. Calm restraint. Inside the Combat Information Center, analysts layered projected vectors over the live tactical display. If the Venezuelan vessels continued on their current headings, several of them would end up forward of the carrier's bow within the hour. They would still remain outside any immediate navigation hazard, but close enough to complicate the picture and create a powerful visual statement. This was not about physically stopping the carrier. It was about controlling the story. Gray zone operations depend on uncertainty. No direct confrontation, no clear boundary crossed, just enough pressure to invite a reaction, capture the moment, and later shape the public version of events. The Venezuelan vessels still had not answered maritime calls. That silence did not feel accidental. One contact briefly increased speed, then eased back into formation. Another shifted heading by 3 degrees, tightening the arc even further. Through high-powered optics, personnel could be seen on deck. Crew members stood near forward positions. Equipment remained covered but visible. Every detail was documented. Long-range cameras recorded hull numbers. Radar systems tracked movement. Electronic sensors quietly monitored signal activity. The carrier was not speaking loudly, but it was listening to everything. At 4:03 p.m., one Venezuelan vessel activated its surface search radar at higher power. The signal appeared immediately on U.S. displays. It was not the most sensitive type of tracking signal, but it was clear enough to be noticed. The officer of the deck acknowledged the update with a simple nod. No visible reaction followed. This was still below the level that required a stronger response, and everyone in the room understood that. The real risk in moments like this is not always the maneuver itself. It is misunderstanding. A small course correction could be read the wrong way. A radio call could be misheard. A cautious move could be mistaken for a challenge. The margin for error does not disappear suddenly. It narrows slowly, minute by minute. Even so, the carrier strike group remained composed. Behind the scenes, systems began to adjust with quiet precision. Air surveillance assets shifted their patterns. Escort ships refined their positions, not moving forward in a confrontational way, but opening lateral space. They were not building a wall. They were building a framework. To anyone watching from far away, nothing dramatic seemed to be happening. 8 ships on the horizon. One carrier continuing its transit. Calm seas, clear skies. But inside the command spaces, everyone understood what was really at stake. This was not about raw power. Not yet. It was about control of time, control of space, and control of perception. The Venezuelan formation held steady. The arc was now impossible to miss. Cameras captured its symmetry. Analysts noted its precision. This was not a chance encounter. It was a message delivered slowly, carefully, and with purpose. The carrier did not answer with a matching maneuver. No visible challenge, no movement to confront the formation, no acknowledgement beyond continuing its legal transit. And in that restraint, another message was being sent, one far more difficult to counter. At sea, sometimes the strongest signal is the one that does not move at all. As the distance continued to close, one fact became impossible to ignore. Whatever Venezuela intended next, the window for uncertainty was closing, and the encounter was already moving into its next stage. By 4:11 p.m., the situation had changed. The Venezuelan vessels still held their arc, maintaining disciplined spacing. Their movement remained controlled, deliberate, and clearly coordinated. But while the formation looked steady on the surface, the environment around it was shifting quietly, not visibly, not dramatically, but decisively. Inside the carrier strike group, the posture changed without a single loud cue. No alarms, no raised voices, just a sequence of measured actions unfolding exactly as they were meant to. Above the carrier, the airspace that had seemed empty only minutes earlier was no longer just open sky. High above the cloud layer, airborne sensors expanded their watch, pushing the strike group's awareness far beyond the horizon. The sea below had not changed, but the way it was being observed had. Inside the Combat Information Center, the tactical picture became sharper with every passing second. Surface contacts were now supported by layered tracking. Bearings were compared against aerial feeds. Speeds were recalculated with greater accuracy. What had started as 8 ships on a screen had become 8 moving profiles, each with behavior, history, and probability attached to it. That is where the real difference begins. A single ship sees what is in front of it. A connected system sees the whole picture at once. Escort vessels shifted with quiet precision, widening their lateral spacing instead of pressing forward. From a distance, it looked like almost nothing had changed. But inside the strike group, that small adjustment created invisible lanes of control, areas where every movement could be watched, measured, and anticipated. No one hurried. Time favored the side that stayed composed. At 4:17 p.m., a helicopter rose from the deck. It did not launch in a dramatic way, and it did not race toward the formation. It lifted smoothly, almost casually, climbing to a low observation altitude while keeping a careful distance. Its purpose was not to provoke. Its purpose was to make the picture clearer. Electro-optical systems came online. Infrared feeds began streaming back in real time. The Venezuelan vessels were no longer distant shapes on the horizon. Their deck layouts became visible. Personnel movement was recorded. Even small details were captured. Crew members gathering near rails, quick hand signals, subtle changes in posture. Still, no forward stations were fully staffed. Still, no maritime calls were answered. And still, the carrier held its course. The strength of a carrier strike group is not only in what it can do, it is in what it can absorb. It can take pressure without reacting emotionally. It can wait long enough for the other side to reveal its purpose first. The Venezuelan ships continued making tiny course corrections, trying to preserve the shape of their formation as the carrier moved ahead. But symmetry is difficult to maintain. It requires constant adjustment. And every adjustment creates information. Every small turn was recorded, every speed change was noted, every signal was analyzed. At 4:23 p.m., one vessel drifted slightly ahead of the others, tightening the spacing more than planned. Another corrected late, creating a small distortion in the formation. To an untrained observer, it would have looked meaningless. To the analysts, it meant friction. The formation was starting to work harder. The effort required to maintain the maneuver was becoming visible. Above them, the helicopter continued its orbit. Quiet, steady, watching, no warning yet, no escalation, just presence. And that presence mattered because it removed uncertainty. Every movement could now be seen. Every decision could be traced. In gray zone encounters, uncertainty is leverage, and that leverage was disappearing quickly. Inside the Combat Information Center, the captain reviewed the plot. The carrier was now only minutes from the point where the arc would either open up or force the next decision. Still, there was no deviation, no change in speed, no change in heading. The message was clear. This ship was not moving around pressure. It was moving through it. By now, the Venezuelan commanders had to understand what was happening. They were not dealing with a vessel reacting on its own. They were operating inside a layered, connected system that did not need to announce itself to be effective. That realization arrived quietly. No speech was needed. The next decision by either side would determine how the encounter ended. And for the first time since the 8 vessels appeared on radar, the advantage no longer belonged to the side trying to shape the space. It belonged to the side that already understood it. At 4:29 p.m., the geometry broke. One Venezuelan vessel, which had previously held its place in the arc, moved ahead half a knot faster than the rest. It was not dramatic. It was not sudden. But on the tactical display, the change was impossible to miss. Its track crept forward, reducing the closest point of approach ahead of the carrier's bow. That shift crossed a line. Not a legal line. Not a point of no return, but an operational one. Inside the Combat Information Center, the update moved quickly through the chain. Distances were recalculated. Time to closest approach shortened. The formation that had depended on balance was now showing strain. The carrier did not slow, it did not turn, it did not show distress. Instead, the response came from above. The helicopter that had been observing quietly adjusted its profile, descending slightly and tightening its orbit. The move was deliberate, visible, and clear. Its sensors focused forward. Electro-optical feeds sharpened. Infrared confirmed engine output and deck activity aboard the advancing vessel. Still, no direct challenge was made. Still, no dramatic action followed. Then the broadcast went out. Calm, measured, professional. Venezuelan naval vessel, you are conducting unsafe maneuvers in international waters. Alter course immediately. The message was transmitted once, then repeated in Spanish. No raised voices, no threats, just clarity. For several seconds, nothing changed. The Venezuelan vessel held its speed. Its bow wake stayed sharp. On deck, crew movement paused, as if everyone was waiting for the next instruction. Cameras captured the moment completely. A brief pause in the middle of open water, then the wake began to soften. Speed dropped by a fraction of a knot, then by another. The vessel shifted heading by only 2 degrees, barely visible to the eye but decisive on the tactical display. The closest point of approach widened. The immediate pressure eased. That single adjustment started a chain reaction. The nearby ships corrected next, trying to preserve a formation that no longer served its original purpose. the arc lost its clean shape. What had looked like a coordinated front began to break apart into individual choices. The helicopter held its position steady and watchful. A non-contact visual marker briefly appeared on the water near the lead vessel's bridge area, not as an act of confrontation, but as a clear indication that every movement was being observed. The message had been received. At 4:37 p.m., the formation dissolved. Within minutes, the 8 ships that had defined the encounter were no longer controlling its shape. The carrier continued forward exactly as it had from the moment the first contact appeared. Same speed, same heading, same calm wake moving across the water. There was no collision, no dramatic exchange, no sudden escalation, only documentation. Every maneuver was recorded, every transmission was logged, every correction was time-stamped and archived. What had started as an attempt to apply pressure ended as a complete record of events, one that would be difficult to reshape later. By 4:45 p.m., the Venezuelan vessels were opening distance. Their headings were no longer coordinated. Their formation had broken apart. The horizon slowly returned to what it had been earlier that afternoon: open water, scattered silhouettes, and no immediate tension ahead. On the flight deck, operations had never truly stopped. Below deck, the Combat Information Center returned to routine monitoring, even though nothing about the last hour had felt routine. The system had worked exactly as intended. Presence maintained, boundaries reinforced, control preserved. At sea, dominance is not always announced through dramatic action. Sometimes it is shown by who continues forward while everyone else is forced to adjust. That afternoon in the Caribbean, there was no open confrontation, but the result was clear. For anyone watching closely, the lesson was impossible to miss. Restraint, when supported by capability and discipline, is not weakness, it is leverage. By early evening, the Caribbean had settled back into its familiar stillness. The Venezuelan ships were now separated by miles of open water. Their headings diverged. Their formation had dissolved into ordinary navigation. On radar, the contacts blended back into the wider maritime picture. They were still being tracked, but they no longer shaped the moment. The immediate encounter was over. What remained was the record. Inside the carrier strike group, analysts reviewed the timeline in detail. Radar plots showed every bearing change. Optical feeds captured every movement on deck. Audio logs preserved every unanswered call and every measured warning. Nothing was left to guesswork. Everything had been preserved as fact. That is how modern naval encounters are often decided. Not by dramatic images in the moment, but by what can be proven afterward. From a tactical perspective, the outcome was clear. The carrier completed its transit without changing course. No high-risk response was used, no rules of engagement were crossed, control of space, timing, and escalation remained with the U.S. Navy from first contact to the final maneuver. But the larger story went beyond a single afternoon. The Venezuelan move followed a familiar pattern. Create pressure just below the point of open confrontation, invite a reaction, and try to shape the story afterward. It is a strategy built for cameras, headlines, and political messaging, not for a long test of discipline. What it meant instead was something different. A system designed to absorb pressure without reacting impulsively. A command structure that values documentation over drama. A doctrine that treats restraint not as a limitation, but as a tool. Throughout the encounter, the carrier strike group never needed to visibly display its full capability. Everyone involved understood what was present. What mattered more was discipline, the ability to hold course, maintain posture, and allow the other side to reveal its intentions through its own actions. Intent, over time, always leaves a trail. Every course correction by the Venezuelan ships narrowed their options. Every unanswered call reduced the room for ambiguity. Every attempt to preserve the formation increased the strain on coordination. By the time the moment of decision arrived, the outcome had already been shaped by minutes of recorded behavior. In the end, the withdrawal was not driven by a dramatic warning. It was driven by clarity. For naval professionals, the lesson is straightforward. Escalation control does not mean doing nothing. It means doing exactly what is necessary and nothing more. Presence without provocation, observation without overreaction, authority without noise. That balance is difficult to maintain. It requires training, trust, and a command environment that values patience as much as power. But when it works, it leaves very little room for misunderstanding. As the carrier continued on its course that evening, flight operations returned to their normal rhythm. Watches changed, logs were signed. To the crew, the day closed like many others. Another transit, another set of contacts, another reminder of why discipline matters. Yet beyond the horizon, the impact remained. 8 warships had tried to shape an encounter through proximity and numbers. One carrier strike group answered by doing exactly what it was built to do: operate lawfully, remain composed, retain control from start to finish. No dramatic clash, no collision, no retreat, just one side moving forward and the other deciding it was time to move away. So the question is not only for commanders, it is also for observers. In moments like this, should pressure be answered with immediate escalation or with controlled restraint? Is strength best shown through a louder response or through the confidence not to raise the temperature at all? The Caribbean encounter offers its own answer. At sea, the side that controls the narrative is often the side that never needed to raise its voice. And sometimes the most decisive move is simply staying the course.